the ability to eliminate these interprovincial trade barriers has always been there.
Yeah.
And we don't do it, we won't seize that opportunity to win and gain that. But when the Trump tariff comes on, the threat of the tariff comes on, that fear of loss is actually what ends up motivating policymakers.
Hello everyone, my name is Lauren Remlard. I'm the President and CEO of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the Chamber's podcast. Today, pleased to welcome, between the two ferns, if you will, our chair, Kevin Selch, owner, founder of Little Brown Jug, a fine establishment in our Exchange District. Chances are, you might not know Kevin is the owner-operator of Little Brown Jug, but chances are, if you enjoy beer in this province, you've had one of his many fine products, or even Brightwater. I'm already jumping into it, I know, but welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Lauren. Great to be here.
So again, a lot of people know your story, but they don't know the full story. So maybe we'll just kind of start with a very simple, tell us your story. What led you to where you are today in terms of your business? And then as a follow-up, maybe kind of what led you to where you are now in terms of the chamber chair. But let's start with your business. How did you get into the beer business?
Sure. So before I grew up in Winnipeg, but I was living in Ottawa, working as an economist with the federal government, doing trade policy negotiations in Geneva at the World Trade Organization.
Which is a natural segue right into
Natural segue. And then out of that, I got plucked, and I was the senior advisor to a senior civil servant, and we did a lot of the front page microeconomic issues of the day, just telecoms and shipbuilding procurement. And as I went on, I kind of saw my career path and what would become of it in the government, and I decided, I don't think I'm ready to put on those golden handcuffs quite yet.
Yep.
So I wrote a very detailed business plan, because what do you know to do in government than write a really detailed report?
I can see that. And for the record, we both spent 10 years in the federal government, so it is something
we have this in common.
We have this in common, have shared some of our stories.
Yes, we know what it's like on the inside.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a very detailed business plan, came back to Winnipeg, walked up and down the streets of the Exchange in the downtown trying to find the right location, because for me it was important to be in the heart of the city, and finding that location in the Exchange was ideal. Putting in a brewery, you need a certain amount of space and height and certain requirements, and so it took a little bit of searching for that. And then the other thing about opening a brewery is you can't just put your toe in the water and start small, like by selling a few beers or seeing if it takes off. You have to make a big capital investment, so that requires coming back, finding investors to come on board, getting banks and BDC to come on board, and then opening it up all at once. So that's what I did.
I must say, I remember it was one of the first chairs I worked with in this role, a gentleman, Wadood Ibrahim. I remember him talking about, after having served as chair, and sorry, Wadood, if you're watching this, I don't betraying any confidences, but he really articulated the need to make sure that the chamber always had a good mix of people in leadership positions, in particular those that, we have a lot of service providers, but he said it was really important the importance of having leadership that understands what it's like to make stuff, to make something, because that entrepreneurial journey is markedly different. They're experiencing and interacting with government, the permitting process, all those sorts of things. So when you hear that, when you reflect on your experience, building a capital-intensive business and all these kind of things, how would you characterize your entrepreneurial journey?
Right. I mean, I do think of myself as a food manufacturer, right? We are in manufacturing. And when we look at that whole journey about taking some raw ingredients in terms of grains at the beginning and carrying through the whole production of that product, packaging of that product, quality assurance of that product, distribution of that product, there's a whole life cycle of our supply chain that we have to manage. And so, I think that has given me a lot of touch points, renovating a building, doing the capital equipment, expanding, some of the environmental grants we've applied for and received around Little Brown Jug. And then taking our brand, at the end of the day, you make a product, it's a great product, and then you have to market that product. And you have to create the demand for that product. And so whether it's marketing or promotions or being involved in the community, and again, that was a big part of us being in the Exchange, right, is just being in the community and what that means and how people interact with your brand. Because once you create it and set it up, you lose some control of what it is, because it's what other others interpret it to be.
So I'll circle back on that, but I want to pick up on the second part of the question, which was, okay, so your entrepreneurial journey, but what led you to the chamber, right? Because we'll have people join, and it's, I want to grow my business. I want to do something particular within community, and so everyone's reason for joining, there's similarities, but it's a unique story, just like your business story is uniquely to you. So what's your story of how you came to the chamber and ultimately came into the position of chair?
Right. So, being in the government, I saw the influence that the chambers and organizations like the chamber would have on decision makers. And so being in a highly regulated industry downtown, wanting to make a positive impact in Winnipeg, it made sense early on once we opened up to become chamber members. It just felt like natural to be part of that. And then really I got to commend you, Lauren, like you found me at a sampling event put on by the chamber Christmas time.
I remember that.
Kind of
441.
Right.
441 Main. Yep.
Brought me in and kind of like encouraged me to get more involved with the chamber. And so it was really your welcoming me in that made the big difference in terms of getting more involved. And then just sort of saying yes when you asked me to serve or be involved in things, being able to take that leadership role. Now, when you asked me to be chair, that was like 2.5 years ago.
And I thought, forever ago.
It seems like forever. And I tell people, I think, when you asked me, I thought in 2.5 years, I'll have nothing to do. I'll have all the free time in the world. And then it comes along, you're like, oh, wow, I'm still pretty busy. But it is so much fun being chair. It is an honor. And the chamber does such a good job at supporting me as chair as well. So I really commend you for the organization you run here.
Well, no, thank you. And it is a true partnership between our members, volunteer leadership like yourself, the team we have here. But I will say, 3 months into the role now, you were sworn in October, 3.5 months, I guess. What's been your take so far? Like, what have been the highlights for you? Because we've had a pretty jam-packed first 3 months, lots of meetings and so forth, but what really stands out for you?
For me, a highlight was the state of the province. That was pretty cool to go and do. But I think what is an overall highlight is just how hungry our business community is to be involved and actually for some change, I think. We can look at the election in the U.S. and the inauguration today, and we can interpret it that I think in Canada as well as the US, people are looking for different answers. And I think the involvement of the business community coming back after COVID, it just feels different now. Like even a year ago, it didn't feel as engaged, I think, as it does now. It was starting to get re-engaged, but it just feels like we're getting some momentum, and I think that's a positive thing.
You mentioned being a trained economist, and I know we've had a lot of conversations, and I have to say it's been a particular pleasure having someone in the chair role. Every chair brings unique strengths, their expertise. Your expertise, of course, being on the front lines of these trade negotiations. If I recall correctly, you were the Doha round, WTO. You've been on the front lines of these kind of trade negotiations. So I want to explore that, but I also note, I remember we had the Bank of Canada governor in June, and how much I really did appreciate, Kevin, does this make sense? And appreciate the subtle and gentle adjustments to some of the questions. And of course, I think we can all agree, people, economists like yourself and a few others in the room understood this beverage curve that the governor talked about. The rest of us were quickly Googling what is a beverage curve in economics. So I don't know if you want to answer that question. But honestly, again, inauguration today, it is our understanding, as per the Wall Street Journal, he is instructing trade agencies to investigate the issue of trade policies and agreements they have with Canada, Mexico, and China. And in some ways, I guess a little bit of a 11th hour reprieve, if you will, but we're still facing uncertainty. So I'm just curious, for those that are watching this that maybe don't understand how the trade game works and negotiations, from your experience, what do you think, what would you advise as to potentially the future?
The future?
Well, at least in the next 24 to 48 hours, because you never know what may change. But in your experience, having worked with these various trade agencies that are now going to be advising the president, here's our experience on that.
Well, that's tough because, all of international trade is premised around the idea of rules-based trade, right? So like that, whether you're at the World Trade Organization or Canada, U.S, CUSMA agreement, that there's a dispute resolution solution. There's like ways to resolve disputes, and this is, with Trump, he's essentially blown all of that up, right? And so it's a little bit back to like a brass knuckle back to the drawing board situation. I think economists, we kind of got complacent, and policy leaders around the benefits of trade. I think that we had this agreement with the U.S. and like any kind of trade agreement, like the pain is specific, but the benefit is spread out, right? And so it's really hard to articulate the cumulative benefit across an entire population. But we did do better, and we are richer because of it. And it's not to say that there doesn't need to be more to support the areas of pain and the adjustment that had to happen. But now we're looking at the reverse of that, where the benefits could be specific to some specific industry as well as the pain. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
So, two things staying on that. We're going to start federal, and then we'll kind of work down to local a bit. Again, on everyone's mind is, what is the state of Canada-U.S. relations? Our Prime Minister has resigned. We're now into a leadership race, and the world is just changing by the day, right? You could even say by the hour. You never know what could be posted on social media and so forth. But in terms of the trade agreements, one of the things we've talked about, because of the threat of the tariffs, everyone, ourselves and other business organizations, we've been advising the federal government, provincial government, even the municipal government on here are the various steps you need to take. One of the things we talk so much about, even before this economic existential crisis emerged, was we need to diversify our markets. That 72% of all of Manitoba's exports, for example, go to the United States, approximately $16 billion. A big chunk of our GDP is dependent on the two-way trade with the United States. I'm not saying that we should move away from that, but like in any business, you want to mitigate risk. So a big part of that is we've got agreements with the European Union, we've got agreements with the South Asian markets, free trade agreements that we just haven't seemed to really utilize. In your experience, what do we need to do to really ramp up that diversification in these markets from your perspective?
From my perspective, the gravitational force is in the U.S. But the best way I'll flip this on you and say the best way to diversify our trade is like interprovincial trade, right? That's between provinces is the best way. That will build a larger market here. That larger market can then compete against other larger markets. Sure, there's things we can do around LNG and different ways to export fuels and other things on the coast, right? There's definitely more we can do around that, but we do spend a lot of effort trying to diversify trade, and it's really difficult. The main thing is, I think, looking at our own house and figuring out how we can strengthen trade within Canada. I think there's two big messages that come out of what's going on in the U.S. One is we need to remove interprovincial trade barriers. We need to strengthen Canada. And even if we somehow dodge the worst of this, right, we still need to do it because it will make us richer. Our standard of living is falling behind. It's a way to add to our prosperity. But then the second thing in all of this, even if we don't, the big signal in all of this is that there's an opportunity to further integrate our economy with the United States. That's really where this could be going. And that's probably a huge win for us, although it could cause a lot of disruption over the next few years in terms of getting to that point.
Do you think that conversation about economic integration with the United States has been hurt by public musings about political integration, that Canadians now are of the viewpoint we need as much distance? I'm just curious, again, the personalities overtaking the logic of certain elements like that.
Yeah, we vacation in the U.S., we have family in the U.S., there's a lot of cross-border trade. We follow their news. We are, our cultural leaders are in the U.S. influencing American culture. We are part of that ecosystem, right? I would love to see more labor mobility across the borders. That's definitely not what the president is thinking of.
Definitely on the southern border.
or across our border per se. Although, if we could get there through some integration around common tariff policies, some common border policies around the sort of perimeter of North America and truly integrate. This is not really an economic thing, but it's all about spheres of influence. And I think how this is going to unroll geopolitically is going to be very different. And we're not going to recognize that it may be in 10 years, and we need to get on the right side of where this is going.
So I want to circle back to interprovincial trade barriers and actually talk about productivity. But just to close the loop on what we just talked about there was, when we take a look at the world today, I think for so many of us, you kind of just got into this comfort zone of liberalized trade and global rules of order, and just less siloing and more kind of we are one world kind of global trade and viewpoint. But like everything else, it's a pendulum, right? So we went that way, and it feels as though now the pendulum's coming back to a little bit more isolationism. Europe even, you're seeing these things, political forces, more populist and these sorts of things. So it's kind of just interesting. Canada really does need to wrap its mind around how are we going to function in this evolving geopolitical context where, the United States is a sphere of influence unto itself. And it's ideally, we'd like to think Canada and Mexico, it's to our advantage that we think continentally, but the United States doesn't necessarily see it that way. Anyone that watches U.S. weather knows it doesn't see.
Except for Toronto.
Except for Toronto, yes. But on interprovincial trade barriers, that's something as a chamber we've talked a lot about. When we were just in Ottawa in October, meeting with cabinet ministers across the board and emphasizing we need to make sure we get our house in order around interprovincial trade barriers. One of the things, even with the province, we were saying, like, let this too shall pass, this crisis we find ourselves in, but let's not let this crisis go to waste. Let's make sure we move forward on interprovincial trade barriers. What's the number that gets bantied around? About $2,000 per person. Potential impact of 25% tariffs. We know, even on a conservative side, the estimated impact of a positive net benefit to Canadians, if we eliminated all our interprovincial trade barriers, would be about $1,800. So within our own control, we could potentially offset the entire impact while strengthening the union that is Canada. The one area that always gets talked about when people ask me, what do you mean interprovincial trade barriers? I talk about beer. I talk about alcohol sales. Can you explain what is the barrier to alcohol mobility in this country?
Okay, I'm going to come to that. But first, let's talk. You brought up something really interesting there, which is just around the complacency of our standard of living stagnating, the American growing, and nobody really. I mean, there's economists and Deputy Bank of Canada governor raising the alarm, and it all comes down to the psychology of loss versus the psychology of gain. We're more afraid to lose something than to gain something. So the ability to eliminate these interprovincial trade barriers has always been there.
Yeah.
And we don't do it. We won't seize that opportunity to win and gain that. But when the Trump tariff comes on, the threat of the tariff comes on, that fear of loss is actually what ends up motivating policymakers. So that is an interesting dichotomy there. But around beer, yes. So interprovincial trade barriers, we're looking at the Premier Canoe in his State of the Province address talked about it. All First Ministers are talking about it. The media is talking about it. Like, what does it mean? It means a lot of things, but the number one thing that always captivates everybody is beer. No, sorry, alcohol sales. Beer,
but
wine,
we all,
spirits, right? Because, one is because so much of what actually interprovincial trade barriers interrupt are business-to-business interactions, I think. Whereas this actually impacts the consumer and they don't understand it because we are supposed to be one market in Canada, right? And the fact that you can't order wine or bring across beer or different rules, and the fact that there's been some high-profile cases around people trying to do it.
Went to Supreme Court of Canada? Like, what is more Canadian than a case involving beer? Exactly. Has made its way to the Supreme Court.
And for the Supreme Court to support the segregation of the market, right, in that way. So I think the reason why beer, wine, spirits sales across Canadian borders, why it gets the attention of First Ministers and the media, it's because the public actually can't wrap their heads around why something so asinine is allowed to continue for so long. Why can't it be addressed, right? And so, I mean, removing the barrier will have a positive impact for sure on my business and other businesses. There's a lot of interprovincial issues at play when it comes to alcohol because it's highly taxed in every jurisdiction. So the question for our government as we do this is, what have you done to prepare and set up the Manitoba brewing industry and alcohol producing industry to succeed in a Canada that has the interprovincial barriers removed. So that's the number one thing that if I were Minister Simard and the Premier and Minister Sala, I would be thinking like, what are the policies and programs we have done here in Manitoba to make sure our industry can compete in that world? And I have to say, like, we are very open to other jurisdictions in Canada in terms of them selling their product into Manitoba. We do not get that same reciprocity into other markets, and we pay about twice the tax on our beer production as Ontario and BC and a multitude more than Alberta. So that's something
just
that would
for the
have to be
record,
looked at.
You're paying more here,
Yeah.
not because of the producer, because of the environment in which the producer is operating in. I think that's very important. So, if I may ask, I'll bounce off of that. Are we ready for free trade of alcohol in Canada? Is Manitoba ready?
I think we're ready for it. We need to, there's so many issues to negotiate between provinces, right? Yep. But if we can make movement on that in terms of, a big part of this is like, it comes down to the liquor boards. Yes, we have one in Manitoba, but the LCBO is the largest purchaser of alcohol. That is the market that all of the provinces, everybody is focused on, including our international trade partners in terms of how you get European wines listed there, how you get BC wines listed there. It's a mess, right? But we have our own mess here in Manitoba.
Everyone has.
But we're a smaller jurisdiction, so people don't focus on us the same way that they do on a market as large as Ontario, right? But fixing again the difference between the fear of loss versus the opportunity to gain. We could change these things here in Manitoba of our own accord and gain and benefit from it, but we don't unless we're fearing some kind of loss.
Well, that's it. I did a media interview today talking about the Trump tariffs potential, and then we're talking about interprovincial trade barriers, and the question asked to me is, do I have hope that will move in this direction? And I didn't want to be pessimistic about it. I said, but history has shown, and maybe this plays to your psychology of loss and gain. I said, the history of this country is one of, we dodged the bullet.
Yeah.
Let's return to what once was, right? This is the equilibrium. We're always trying to find equilibrium as opposed to the benefit of disrupting that equilibrium. And that's my fear a little bit, that the focus is on just avoiding these tariffs as opposed to a wake-up call to say, okay, there's going to be another threat somewhere down the line. How do we stabilize? How do we solidify and strengthen the economic union that this country is, so that, my understanding is Mexico, for example, isn't overly fussed about what's transpiring in Washington, because they've got diversification through South America, they've got scale, population, they've got connections to other global markets. They're just it'd be unfortunate, but we're okay.
Yeah. We're in a different situation. But even what you're talking about is this is, I guess, essentially the grain and the thrust of all entrepreneurship. It's finding the opportunity. So that psychology of loss and gain, it's this is what entrepreneurs do. We look for the opportunity, we make it work, and we problem solve. So this is what we do every day. And to take that on a national level to solve some of these bigger problems, I think there is opportunity there, even though it's menacing.
So let's expand, because we've talked a lot about, when you came into the role in your speech, you talked about, making, what can we do to incent more investment in our community? Yes, the part of that is government being more business friendly, enticing more investment, encouraging and being welcoming to it. We talked a lot about productivity, and that is, of course, something that, as we look to mitigate some of the impacts potentially of trade disruptions and so forth, there are things we need to be more productive, that we maybe kind of rest on our laurels and accept our lagging productivity, because that would require some change maybe, and change is difficult. So I'm just curious, as 3 months into it, we've had meetings with the mayor, we've had meetings with the premier, we've had meetings with federal officials. If you could just explain kind of your thoughts on when I say you've talked about how do we incent more investment in this city and this province, when you say that, what are you talking about specifically? What are you looking to see?
Sure. I'll back up even further and say that, as an economist, I'll look at Winnipeg, at Manitoba, and it's clear we have a prosperity problem, meaning we don't have enough prosperity.
That's a problem.
we focus on dividing the pie a lot more than growing it, whereas prosperity and a strong economy is a merit in its own right, not just to pull the cart, but because having a job, being able to having self-reliance, as well as being able to support those in need, go hand in hand, right? And we don't focus enough on that. And so if I look at that, we say, you know, what's driving productivity and standard of living? It's needing more investment, right? And needing more private sector investment that is not, you know, coerced tax dollars going towards projects, but truly money that could go anywhere. Is it coming here? And we know we're not earning enough. We're not bringing in enough here. So there's a few things that we can look at around that. I mean, there's not too many magic bullets. There's a lot of things that create friction in terms of those investments. But honestly, there's probably also something to be looked at in terms of how governments collect revenue and how we tax. Can we tax and collect revenues in a way that incentivize growth and investment in the province, or are we not interested in doing that? And so I think some business taxes, some personal taxes, like my job is, in my role as chair, nobody really wants to talk about this right now. They don't want to talk about the fact that some of our tax rates might be uncompetitive and that it might be driving away investment and leaving us poorer here. But that will have to be looked at.
You know, and I agree with you, but you know, for us as a chamber, we've talked about this for a long time. Like, far too often, maybe this is what you're saying, is that I think governments of all political stripes at all levels always just look at taxation as a means to an end. It's a means to raise revenue to pay for the social programming and all that. And no one disagrees that we need taxes to pay for the things we all benefit from. We all drive on these roads. We all thankful for our fire and police protection and community investments. But the problem is government doesn't also see the fact that you should align your tax policy to your economic objectives. We use the example in the payroll tax. Every government says we always want to grow more higher paying jobs, and yet you have a tax that exists that says, congratulations, you've just done what we've asked.
Exactly.
You've created more higher paying jobs, now we're going to tax you for that. And you're like, but I'm already paying corporate, personal, business tax at the city, commercial taxes. Like, you're just taxed and levied at every opportunity. And so your growth, the incentive is to actually move that production elsewhere. So, you know, for our view is government needs to think, you know, we talk about prosperity, is look at your tax policy as an enabler of your economic objective, not just as you know, how are we going to fill the social cart?
No, for sure. This isn't about cutting taxes overall per se, right? It's like the government has to, I know the government could be more efficient. It is about, like, how do you structure that tax policy to align with your economic policy? But in Manitoba too, we're also obsessed around making things affordable. Like, we celebrate I get it, affordable housing and insurance and hydro and gas tax removal. But at the end of the day, like, we've talked about this before, nobody gets excited about coming here just because things are cheap. They want an opportunity, right? Like, if we could create jobs that were not just jobs, but better paying jobs for people, and that they could afford these things, and you could also provide subsidies for those that actually were in need for those basics, I think you'd have a stronger structure to the economy that would promote growth, entrepreneurship, wealth creation.
Well, to support your argument, Toronto and Vancouver are two most expensive cities, not just in Canada, like globally, but especially in North America, yet they continue to be growing leaps and bounds population. People are actively moving there knowing that there are cities that are almost beyond any kind of affordability measure. And these aren't just people moving internationally with means. These are Canadians moving to these centers because, you know, anyone that talks to their kids, I mean, they want to move to places where they can build their economic opportunity. I want an opportunity to build my career, my economic well-being in a place that then I have enough of that I can deal with the affordability issue. Now, not everyone can, fair enough, but it goes to your argument that, you know, people are moving to places that are vibrant economically, culturally, socially. And it also reminds me of a speech many, many years ago my predecessor gave to the Asper School, where he used to, you know, the line, of course, we got low-cost housing and low-cost insurance, and a young lady stood up and said, with all due respect, cheap auto insurance is not my dream. My dream is to build a business. And so, but you moved back here, though.
I did move back, and and it has been great, and I've been there's things here that some of those cities you talked about, I mean, there's ecosystems in those cities, and we have the opportunity, and there is an ecosystem in Winnipeg, an entrepreneurship ecosystem. The Chamber's a big part of that, right? And so there are unique ways in which Winnipeggers do want to support Winnipeggers and make this work. And my business has thrived because I've been supported by people in this community that have wanted to make this succeed and wanted to support a local entrepreneur taking the risk. So sometimes we get in our own way, but we do have a lot going for us. There's also a lot of, I guess the frustrating thing sometimes is that there's so much potential for us as this sort of medium-sized North American city to just make it work in a way that those big cities can't make it work. Like we could do something here that would be exciting and unique and draw a lot of attention. We just need to take a few more steps to get to that point, I think, and figure that out to unlock it.
Yeah, in many ways you could say Winnipeg's like, we're not a startup, but we're not an established Fortune 500. We're big enough to be stable and have revenue growth like a business, but we're also small enough to be nimble and we can adapt quickly, whereas larger, it's more difficult. I do want to talk a little bit, because again, the issue, whether it's the tariffs, interprovincial trade, productivity. We continue to lag there, both from your background as an economist, but you've made investments in your business to enhance productivity. Can you talk about kind of from a macro issue, what you see, what are some of the changes we need to really address this productivity issue? And at a micro level, things that you've actually implemented in your business that have been for a host of reasons, but have really enhanced your productivity?
Sure. I mean, I guess at Little Brown Jug, when I was getting into the market, I tried to build you're very limited on your budget, trying to build the biggest, most efficient plant you can with the budget you have, and then making investments in some productivity enhancing equipment that will allow you to control and repeat your brewing process, use less labor so you can pay your employees more, and try to invest in equipment along the way that makes you more productive. Like that's been the goal. It's difficult as a small producer, but that really has been a big part of the objective. But in terms of overall macro productivity, that really comes down to investment, right? Investment in capital often, but also investment in systems, in training. AI is going to be a big part of this, and in processes. That's really, it's all about like the amount of output that one person can produce in a given hour, right? So what does that mean? How can they do fewer low productive things and move up the value chain?
May I ask, in your particular industry, are you sourcing your production equipment primarily from the United States?
Most of it's from Quebec, actually. It's all dairy-grade manufacturing equipment. We have some local suppliers, but we don't make them in the way that we needed. So most of our equipment is Canadian, some American, and some European components as well.
Because one of the things we've talked about when the Bank of Canada governor was here, and I had actually asked him the question saying we've heard from the central bank, we've heard from federal officials, business needs to invest more to enhance productivity. And not that we disagree with that, but just for context, one of the things we've always talked about is for a lot, that primary way to enhance your productivity is through enhancements in machinery, your production equipment and those sorts of things, in addition to training. But a lot of that equipment is being sourced in U.S. using U.S. dollars, and you're debt financing a lot of that. And the last few years, with interest rates where they were, you were getting slammed if you were investing in productivity because you didn't have the bandwidth to assume the debt. And even if you did, you were taking it on US dollars. And right now, the Canadian dollar is not doing extraordinarily well. So, for people that just think why doesn't business just spend? It's like, well, hold on. It's not Canadian dollar to Canadian dollar. There's a whole raft of challenges that underpin that. But again, there are still things business can do. Like AI is one of the things we hear a lot from small businesses, is a little bit of a leveler, if you will. You might not have the same labor force as a larger company, but AI can help bring to the table in productivity enhancements. But with that comes, of course, the double-edged sword, right? Now you better understand privacy or cybersecurity, all sorts of things, and have rigid and robust policies in place to protect proprietary information going on to ChatGPT and all of a sudden.
But on that too, to roll back a bit, our main equipment was bought in Canada. Our canning line, a lot of our expansion equipment was purchased in the US, so it was difficult with the dollar being so weak. As well, like our cans are also purchased in US dollars. So we do feel that pinch, and especially when inflation went up and interest rates went up, largely driven by consumer inflation, I thought that there was maybe a role for for government to come in with lower interest rates for equipment financing and productivity enhancing, knowing that these were going to come down, we still had a productivity problem as interest rates and inflation were going up. And you bring down inflation through higher productivity. I mean, this is the reason why the 90s we had high productivity and no inflation, because we have sourced that out to China. We were bringing all of these cheap goods, right? So we were able to grow really, really fast without being inflationary. But right now we just went through this business cycle where high interest rates, high inflation, and we weren't getting the productivity gains that pull down inflation.
So we've been talking a lot about, of course, federal macro issues. Let's take it back a little bit more local. You're in the Exchange District. When we survey our members, downtown is the number one issue, which is, it says a lot about our chamber that 2,000 members, they're equally distributed in all areas of the city. There's no one quadrant or region of the city, area of the city that's overly represented in our membership. So the fact that the vast majority of our members are in our downtown, but recognize the importance of downtown it underscores just how important a healthy downtown is. Mm-hmm. On top of that, of course, part and parcel with identifying downtown as important is crime and safety. And it's something we continue to work on, in particular with local government. You do serve on the police board, so I won't ask you anything confidential there. But as an entrepreneur working in the downtown that is on the front lines in some ways, but also at the policy level, being on the police board, what do you say to entrepreneurs that's their concern right now, and what advice do you have to give them in terms of your experience?
Sure. I mean, first of all, Winnipeg does not succeed without a strong downtown, right? It's incumbent on all of us. The success of downtown matters on all kinds of interconnected ways, right? Which we won't get into here unless you want to. But for me, coming back to Winnipeg in the Exchange, it felt like there was a certain momentum to the downtown in the Exchange. I mean, the Jets had come back, the city had a certain enthusiasm, and I was just excited to help be part of that momentum in our own little way. Obviously, we got knocked down a lot during COVID. There's been issues in the downtown. I think we're turning, I think we've bottomed out and we're on the way up. I see things getting better. It's positive. There are challenges for sure, but I think we are starting to put some of the things in place, whether it's the city, the province, and businesses that are starting to raise it back up. So I think the downtown is turning a corner here, and I'm excited to see what comes of that. Now, we have to keep reinforcing that, and there's some things I think businesses and government need to re-engage with the downtown and bring their employees back downtown. I think that's the number one thing that would help support businesses in the downtown and add to the vibrancy. I know in the long term, we're going to have more people living downtown, but the thing that could happen right now, today, is workers could come back. I mean, people love Winnipeg, they love the downtown, and that's the number one contribution they could make. Well,
so much I want to unpack with you on the downtown, but you've said it well in the meetings, during the pandemic, you were told you were a hero if you stayed home.
Yeah.
Right? Doing one for your community, you're looking out for your neighbors by staying home, working from home, and we celebrated you were a hero. And now our downtown, our city needs you back.
Our city needs you to come back downtown and re-engage.
Yeah.
And
it's a lever that government doesn't have to negotiate. It doesn't it just has to pull. Yeah. Because the place of work, unless otherwise stipulated in a collective agreement, the place of work is a management right.
Yeah.
And so government just has to say, look, it's nowhere in the collective agreement that you have get back downtown. Now, we know we're going to lose some people. I mean, that's the reality. But we need people back downtown. And this is something, and we've talked to government, it's been a passion, and you've spoken very eloquently on it. But in terms of the downtown, one of the other things, and it's on the crime, is and I've heard other businesses say it, I pay commercial property tax, I pay residential property tax, I pay a biz levy, and you're paying multiple taxes for effectively one service being delivered by multiple, if you want to explain that a little bit, because I know it's kind of a frustrating point.
Sure. I mean, like, we pay as downtown, I mean, as downtown businesses, as many businesses in Winnipeg, we pay property taxes, business taxes. We are the only city in Canada that has a business tax, the only city in Canada that has a business tax.
Yes.
Then we pay biz levies, and the biz provides a lot of services to us, right? But we also bring people downtown that plug parking meters and transit fares. And if I look at the amount of services we're provided by the city versus how much we generate for the city, like, I just don't think that there's the right balance there. I mean, on one hand, people can say, oh, like, there's so much economic activity still going on in the downtown that if we just took some of the wealth that's generated this and pushed it back into the downtown, there should be a lot more resources available than are actually materializing. We're generating a lot of economic activity and wealth in the downtown, and we can't just wring our hands about, oh, what are we going to do around the downtown, and we need to provide more for the police, and we need to do some beautification. And yes, all of those things are true, but bring the workers back downtown. Like, government has a leadership role to play. And the surprising thing for me is when I talk to my private sector counterparts at True North, at RBC, at M&P, at a lot of law firms, downtown businesses, they're there 5 days a week. And I asked them, like, do you need to be there 5 days a week? They're like, no, just like, we only have to be in like 3 days a week. But they're choosing to come in every day because they see the value of the ecosystem, of interacting, of productivity, of going somewhere, being engaged. And like, these are private businesses that have other ways of assigning key performance indicators and performance reviews to their employees, and yet they're here, they're re-engaging. We see it a little bit with the traffic in the morning, and I kind of love to see that in some ways, because it means that people are coming back.
So staying local in terms of crime, but shifting gears a little bit, bringing in the federal again, obviously we're going to be heading into a federal election sooner than what was required in the fall. And bail reform, these are things that we continually hear a lot about. We're seeing play out in the papers and the news reports almost on the daily. We're going to be bringing in the new police chief when they are announced as the springtime membership luncheon speaker. And one of the things we're really looking for in that speech is we understand the protection of human life is paramount. No one's disagreeing with that. Human life comes before property. But the concern is if we don't collectively, as a police force, as a city government, start paying greater attention to the needs of business owners, property owners, private property owners, respecting property private rights, you're going to start seeing business quietly vacate high crime areas. Mm-hmm. We've seen it in other large U.S. cities where you start to have the depopulation of the business, and then comes the residents moving out, and then what you have left is basically hollowed out areas of your city. Yeah. So when we talk about protecting businesses, that's the starting point to protect neighborhood vibrancy. Imagine Osborne Village without the businesses. Mm-hmm. What would that look like? The Exchange District, no businesses. Yeah. It's a different feel altogether. I don't know, like in your conversation, I don't want you obviously to betray anything from the police board, but like, are we heading in that direction? Do you feel like collectively there's an acknowledgement that that is where the police force does have to transition? And
yeah, I mean, during my time on the board, and this is one of the issues that's near and dear to me in terms of making sure that you talked about, how do we encourage investment in Winnipeg? And people are not going to invest if that private property is not protected. And we do see a hollowing out of some of the neighborhoods. And to come back to the beginning about the opportunity to gain versus the fear of loss, right? Like, we're worried about losing what we still have sometimes, whereas there's still a huge opportunity to gain. Look at the vacancies. And when I had the chance to go to Vietnam over the holidays, and it was just kind of fascinating to watch how in a less regulated market, just the nuance of everybody kind of selling and interacting on the commercial basis, like all of the store areas are full. Everybody's kind of conducting commerce in some ways with you as a tourist or each other, and like that kind of ecosystem is really struck me, and I brought that thought home to think like, oh yeah, we can, like, that can happen here. We need to bring back the people. We need to unleash it and just make it simpler for people to do business, because there is a desire to make your own way, to start a business, to be an entrepreneur, if you can free some of those constraints.
I want to be cognizant of our time. There's just so many more things we could touch on, but one of the things, again, leaning into your economic background, is our upcoming summit, EconX, April 29th. Something that was asked in partnership with the mayor's office, as those that were attending the State of the City. It issued a call to the chamber to rise to talk about, what can we do as a community, but in particular, what are the things available to businesses that you can do right now to help, not only help your business, but help really drive economic prosperity in our community. So as an entrepreneur, why should people attend this event from your perspective? Like an opportunity to weigh in and help shape these kind of decisions? Is it the interaction? What's exciting you about that event?
I mean, this event is kind of the whole focus of my being a chair of the Winnipeg Chamber this year. I wanted to have, my main goal was to get policymakers and businesses' attention on investment and what drives investment, right? Like we have, and around this, the other part is just having the basic metrics as an economist to be able to look at our economy and just know truly and frankly what is happening within Winnipeg and our economy. And so EconX, I think, is a great opportunity for people to come together and shape the dialogue of what Winnipeg is about and what the opportunities are to go forward. Where are our wins and where are they going to come from? And to be part of that, I think is going to be very exciting.
Well, and no, I appreciate that. We hope we expect a really good turnout. I think because for the reasons you outlined, as well as a lot of what we want to do is present data there, because at the end of the day, we always say to government, we want data-driven decision making. Yeah. Because I think far too often we have this idea of what Winnipeg's economy is. Yeah. And when you actually sit down and analyze it, it's like, yeah, maybe it is a little different.
Wouldn't that be great to have the data to go against the sort of the stories we tell others and ourselves about the place, just to have an honest look and being able to make better decisions around that? I mean, I don't think there's a lot of great sort of granular city data on the city like Winnipeg, right? That you maybe get that in Toronto and Calgary and Vancouver a bit more, but I think what a wealth of information and direction that could give us if we had that for Winnipeg. And we've talked a bit about just being able to respond more timely to governments and policies being made on like what is the impact on Winnipeg, on our economy, kind of the way that a Fraser Institute, a Montreal Economic Institute, or like the Parliamentary Budget Office might do that. And I think looking at that could be really exciting.
So we're going to do rapid fire, but before we do it, is there anything that I didn't touch on that you're like, yeah, if I could take 2 minutes to touch on this one subject, or I want to kind of give you open forum on that.
Well, the only thing I've been talking to people about a little bit around the investment and attracting investment is that at the federal level, they have gender-based analysis on every policy that kind of serves a purpose on evaluating how that policy will impact gender in Canada disproportionately. And I think it'd be interesting to have something like an investment-based analysis where every policy that the government was making, they'd have to put it through the analysis and just look honestly at whether it's good or bad for investment and prosperity in our community. Sometimes you're going to do things that aren't, and that's okay. But just to have that transparency and accountability around decision making would be helpful and informative to the public, I think.
Yeah, because sometimes as a government, and you know this, having worked in Ottawa, and I know 10 years there, government will make a decision, make an investment, make a new policy that the primary objective isn't economic. They recognize there will be an economic impact, but it's a social good or it's a community well-being, and that's the priority. So the analysis shows there's a lot of net benefit there. So thank you very much. Now the most riveting part, we're going to find out the real Kevin Selch. So I'm going to make these up as I go. So let's start with an easy one. Favorite beer?
There we go, 1919.
1919.
It's Winnipeg iconic.
So can I ask, just, I know we're supposed to do rapid fire. 1919, what's the story? Because that was your flagship. Flagship.
We started with just one beer, just making it again and again, perfecting the recipe, getting it out there. And really two things. One is the most significant year in the city's history with the Winnipeg General Strike.
I'm not familiar with this.
And then we also use a brewer's gold, which was made in the year 1919 by crossing a wild Manitoban hop with an English hop. It became the first commercially available hop in the entire world brewing industry. So there's a bit of a dual meaning
Okay,
there.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so there's a beer meaning and a Winnipeg meaning, and it kind of comes together as 1919.
Please check out Little Brown Jug. You can find them online. You can find them in the Exchange District on William.
William, 336 near Red River
336.
College, next to Canadian Footwear.
It's the beginning of 2025. I wish you nothing but growth and prosperity, personally, professionally, in the year. Thank you again for taking on the chair role. It's not an easy role.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to what we can get done over the next 9 months.
And if you enjoyed this, be sure to like, click, subscribe, ring the bell. I think that's what they say all on YouTube. And check us out at the Chamber, www.winnipeg, that's WINNIPEG, chamber.com, or just Google Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce. Follow us on Instagram and all the various social medias as long as they're still in operation. All the best. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'll let you take a sip.
Awesome. Thanks.
Cheers, everyone.